We will now start our first Community Development Committee meeting. Madam Chair, please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Harrison.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent. Mr. Brady.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'd like the record to reflect that Mr. Miller is in attendance.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Thank you. And to the audience, normally we would go to item 4, matters referred to committee, but we have decided to hold this ordinance 003, and we will refer back to this sometime in March. Next item, please.
We have a presentation from the Cuyahoga County Land Bank.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Again, I would like to say welcome to our first Community Development Committee meeting. This committee will be dealing with place-based development issues. Our most pressing task is to oversee the administration of the county's new property demolition program approved by council last fall. Today, we will hear a presentation from the Land Bank, our partner in implementing the demolition program. The Land Bank has been providing guidance and technical assistance for communities seeking to submit applications for the first round of the program, and we will be administering demolition for the vast majority of these communities. The first round of applications are due on February 27th, after which we will invite the Department of Development to come in and give us an update on the status of this program. But today, Gus Francos, President and General Counsel for the Land Bank, and some of his staff are here to educate us on how things are going. We also, Madam Chair, please like to record reflect that Councilman Pernell Jones is in attendance. President Francos, would you please approach?
1, 2. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for having us. It's and congratulations on the first Community Development Committee and being the first ones to be on the agenda for the committee. We're very privileged to do that, so thank you. We have been involved in the process with the County Council, the County Development Department, and providing input where asked to help develop a program around the demolition bond, the $50 million demolition bond that was announced, I think, last April by then County Executive Ed Fitzgerald. This legislation, when it ultimately passed, was a consensus of community stakeholders, people from our largest partner, Cleveland City Council, many of the inner ring suburbs, first ring suburbs, and even several of the outer ring suburbs who had an urgent need for select demolition that either they were incapable of or just didn't have the expertise in doing it, or didn't have the funds, or just wanted the land bank to be in charge of it because we do so much of it. So that process resulted in what we feel has been a great ordinance that came out of this body. And so we're very thankful to you for doing that. There continues to be an urgent need for demolition. I like to characterize it as a continuing root canal, so to speak. I've always said that it's very difficult to stabilize something unless it's very difficult to go forward and to stabilize something unless you stop the hemorrhaging. And so that's in part what we're doing. I mean, a lot of things have to happen at once, but an urgent need continues to be demolition. I had a root canal myself 2 weeks ago, and it was terrible. It was painful, but you can talk about oral hygiene and the future of your teeth and all these kinds of things, but if you need a root canal, you must take care of that right away. You just can't think about the rest of your future oral hygiene unless you take care of that tooth that's decaying, as well as going to ultimately corrupt the rest of your teeth and gums. And so in part, that's kind of, I'm always coming up with new analogies, but having had a root canal, it came to mind. But it is an urgent need, and it will help us to clear out a lot of the things that need to be cleared out in order to continue to grow. which is not to say that things, that growth, that housing rehabilitation, planning is not occurring. It's occurring all over the county. It's just that it's being impeded by a lot of the blight and decay that's in certain parts of our county, worse than others. I'm happy to announce to the council that the process, at least from our perspective, has been very smooth. We have worked with the Department of Development in terms of giving our input as to that application. That has gone very, very well. A lot of collaboration there, and we're very happy the way that is coming down. With respect to the other stakeholders, the various cities that want to participate, there has been no contention or drama or anything like that that I can discern. That often happens when you have multiple people applying for certain funds and applying for lots of funds. There's been a great spirit of cooperation, and if I may say that's in large part because of the good relationship that the Land Bank has with the administration and the council, as well as our relationships over the last 5 years with all of our stakeholders. There's developed a great level of trust between inner ring, outer ring, City of Cleveland suburbs. It's just been very, very good in that regard. We try to be as responsive as we can. We provide a lot of technical assistance, and over these short 5 years that we've been in existence, just a good level of trust and amicable relationships. Do we make mistakes? Yes, we do. We have. But I would say that they are minimal, and we quickly correct them and admit them when we have them. This program is going to lay the groundwork for the various communities to participate in some of their most urgent priorities. And the way the program is set up is that there's a significant amount of strategy built into this ordinance, but at the same time, a great amount of flexibility. And that's what I would maintain is probably the magic of this legislation, because you don't want to have interventions that are all over the place, but at the same time you don't want something similar to like the NSP2 program, which, while good, just too restrictive. You can't really, cities can't really address what they want to address. And so the way we did that was to say, you do have to have a strategy, you do have to consider target areas, priorities, but at the same time you consider neighborhood typologies, things like, where do kids go to school? Where is development envisioned in your community? And because we are fortunate to have communities that are fairly well developed in terms of their planning, and even in cities like, well, I won't mention names, but even in certain cities where they don't have capacity to do a lot of planning, they do have enough. They do have enough information where they can put forth their priorities, and we all pretty much know where the interventions have to occur. A lot of intervention is Cleveland, East Cleveland, Garfield, Maple Heights, and then from there, a smattering throughout the rest of the county. And when I say the rest of the county, I say that because up to this point, we have had, I think, probably 20 communities that have applied or that have signed the agency agreement with the Land Bank. And that's the document by which the Land Bank will serve as the agent for those communities to do their demolition. A few of the cities will do their own demolitions. I think Parma, they have a few. Cleveland, of course. Who else said that they would do their own? Cleveland Heights and Shaker. But the rest of the communities, they will have the Land Bank do that work. And so roughly a little over 20 of those agency agreements have been signed. I think in terms of applications, Cheryl will be able to tell us a little more information on that, how many have applied. But I know for myself, because I've been in conversations directly with development departments, from Maple Heights to Garfield to Mayor Bobst in Rocky River, and I mean, it's just all over the place. And they all have a particular need that we're going to try to help them manage. So we had a meeting, I think last week, to go over the nuance, the legal requirements for doing with a nuisance demolition. And if you recall, there's the demolitions that we do that are owned by the Land Bank. Those are not nuisance per se. That's like an owner knocking down a house that he feels is very, very bad. Nuisance abatement are ones where we don't own it, the city doesn't own it, but it's an immediate hazard. And so we're knocking down homes that are not owned by the municipality. And so in those instances, there's a very careful and legally prescribed method of knocking those houses down. And primarily, they have to do with providing notice, opportunity to be heard, due process. And so that's where, if there's any minefield in this that we need to be extremely wary of, it's that. And so we have had our meetings about that. Many cities are skilled at it, and many of them are not. And so where the cities are not, that's where we will help with quality control and make sure that it gets done right. Not only because we want it to be right, but the land bank, although it may be immunized in liabilities for general things, it is not when it comes to things of that nature. Those are more on the level of civil rights violations, property, life without due process. So we must make sure that we have that right. Unlike Cleveland, if they get one wrong, they're self-insured, they have money, they're a city, the land bank. We have plenty of insurance to be sure, but we're not covered for that kind of infraction. They're excluded. So we just have to make sure that it's perfect, as perfect as possible. So if the standard's perfect, we won't deviate too much from it, hopefully. So with that, unless you have questions or you want to do it afterward, Mr. Whitney is here, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and he can talk a little bit about our role in the application process and what it is that we're going to be called upon to do operationally. I also have Cheryl Stevens here, and she is our Director of Development and Acquisitions, and she is in control and manages the entire demolition system. She's developed a system that is probably next to none nationally. We've probably done a little over 4,000 demolitions now, so we know a little bit of something about that business, from the environmental minefields to the just the costs per square foot. I mean, every kind of nuance you want to know about it, Ms. Stevens can talk about it. And then there's Dennis Roberts here, who, if the council wishes, he can continue to talk a little bit about how through all of that we continue to integrate our housing program, which is our deed and escrow program primarily, and that continues throughout this process. So lest people think that we always have to mention that, because sometimes people think, well, yes, we need demolition, but are we mindful of rehabilitation? And we are on a very large scale at the land bank. So with that, unless you have questions for me, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to Mr. Whitney.
No
By the way,
questions,
my chairman is here as well, Anthony Brincatelli.
Thank you. No questions. We'll hold the questions to after the presentation, and then council members can ask questions there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, council members, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all the support you've given to the land bank. And thank you very much for the passage of this ordinance. As Gus explained, there's just a tremendous need out there. Gus has really given a pretty thorough summary of what we've been up to since the legislation was passed. Thanks, Joe. He made reference to a meeting we had a few weeks ago. Actually, it was very well attended. 60 people representing over 25 municipalities, as well as city council and the city administration, working out more of the details about what's expected from the municipalities' end, what's expected from our end. We do the nuisance abatement demolitions for them, while they have to go through the legal process of making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. With that, as you said, Mr. Chairman, applications due this week, I guess, or the 27th. I think 4 or 5 have been turned in. As Gus mentioned, we've signed agency agreements with 12 to 15, so we expect them to probably come in this week. And again, there was just a tremendous interest, over 25 municipalities represented at the meeting we had. So overall, as Gus said, people seem to be real excited, moving ahead at a good pace, and just working very well together. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Cheryl Stevens, our director that's in charge, among other things, of our demolition activities. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of
morning.
council. The demolition process in Cuyahoga County, led by the Cuyahoga Land Bank, is pretty simple from my perspective, but it has a lot of ingredients. We start everything out with knowledge of who has ownership. Either we take title to a property through the streams of ownership we have, tax foreclosure, the big lenders, the GSEs, Fannie Mae and HUD, or donations or deals that come to us through the courts. For this project, there is a very strong and large different source of funding, and that's the condemnation or declaration of public nuisance by most of the municipalities if ownership cannot be obtained. In that process, we take a picture of every property, we evolve with an analysis, even if a community has designated it as a nuisance after they enter into an agreement with us, we look straight at what it looks like, how it works, because there's always going to be someone who second guesses us. You've never had that happen, so why would we have that happen? Of course, 3 days after they get a notice from the community in which they're located, someone has a problem with it. And so we provide documentation as to our decision for demolition to support the decision that the community has already made. Failing structures, we look at 5 systems that are falling apart, or a majority of them, 3 of them are falling apart. The foundation, the roof, the walls, the electrical, the plumbing, the windows, those kinds of things we're looking at up front. If you're failing 3 of them, it's probably a house that needs to be demolished. And then most people won't disagree with us when they see the interior, especially in suburban communities where they've done cyclical exterior inspections and been able to get people to at least mow the lawn and maintain the front facade. It's sometimes hard to decide that the house needs to be demolished. So we work through all those issues first, and we'll do that with our partner communities. Under the state statute that was created for us, all 59 municipal jurisdictions automatically become our partners. And my team and I try to treat them like they're our best business partners, whether they're in Rocky River, Moreland Hills, Bracknell, or North Royalton. And so what we do in each community is try and lay out a plan for how we want to undertake activities. Because of the volume we expect through this demolition bond, each community will be given a guide on how we can do the projects they want us to do, so they can expect to see the process through the very first steps with entering into a partnership with us, declaration of the nuisance, issuing us a proceed order, and moving toward demolition and what steps are in that, going to bid. If it's a commercial property, whether we have to do environmental issues. If it's a large enough site, do we have to look at any groundwater or environmental issues related to that? And so as we set up goals to work through them, depending on when they submit their applications. Once a week, I talk with Paul Hertig on the staff here. And so we know that as of Tuesday of last week, we had 8 applications that have been turned in to the Department of Development. I'm hoping that number will be much larger this afternoon or tomorrow, because I had talked with 18 communities that said that they were going to turn something in. And so some of them I know. On Friday afternoon, I received a series of calls. When can we come down and get a signature from your chief operating officer? Or can we email it and get a signature, or variation of those? So I expect by Friday afternoon, when you want to see the last of the applications come in, that there will be a large number of applications. And the funding requests that we're looking at range from $250,000 to the full $1 million, even in the suburban communities, because some communities have both single-family structures as well as commercial structures that they'd like for us to take down. One of the first applicants we received information from was Shaker, and they have a request where there are over 15 single-family houses and 4 commercial structures that they want to have come down. And I know we talked with Middleburg Heights, and they have 2 single families and 1 commercial structure they'd like to have to come down. So it varies, and we don't know all the things that will be coming into us, but we're trying to make sure that our capacity to handle these things is good. We brought on some additional field inspectors for those council members who are worried what these sites will look like when we're done. I told you we began the process with the picture. We finished the process with a picture. We stay on top of how our contractors finish the sites, and if they can't finish the sites within our guidelines, we don't pay that. We hold a 10% back, which we call a retainage. And they won't get that retainage until they finish the site and meet with our standards. So if there are problems with the site and you drive by it and you let us know, we typically can get those problems corrected on a reasonably quick basis because people always want that last 10%. And aggregately, it adds up. And if I have too many complaints, I have created instruments that are notices of concern, notices of suspension, notice of termination, and nobody wants a notice of termination. But if you get too many notices of concern or suspension, that's where you're headed. So we have a program we believe is robust enough to handle the new capacity that has been created by this bond fund, but we also have steps from the very beginning to the very end so that you can see what we're doing, how we're doing it, and hopefully we'll produce what each individual community wants because we meet with them and outline how the work will take place. Passing the baton now to Dennis.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, my name is Dennis Robertson. I'm the Director of Programs and Property Management for the County Land Bank. The County Land Bank does a pretty significant number of renovations. A lot of people are just unaware of it. We have a very robust renovation program. In fact, since our inception, we have facilitated the sale and/or renovation of over 1,000 properties. And we've done that through 4 primary vehicles. The first and foremost is what Gus mentioned earlier, our deed and escrow program. And for those of you who may be less familiar with the program, it's relatively simple. If an owner-occupier, person who agrees to live in the property for a certain period of time, or even a responsible investor comes forward and they want to buy a property from the land bank, we vet them, which means we screen them to make sure they're current on property taxes with other properties that they may own. We make sure that they don't have properties that are the subject of condemnations or have been in the chain of known flippers. But once we do that screening, we sell them a house in many cases on favorable terms. In exchange for those favorable terms, we have the buyer agree to renovate the property to an agreed upon specification from the very beginning. We have an intensive monitoring program where we go out, we monitor, and we inspect the renovation every 30 days. And once the renovation has been complete, the land bank will then convey the deed to the buyer. That's the way we make sure that each of our properties are completely renovated before that property leaves the land bank's title. The second way that the land bank conveys properties through our in-house program. In those circumstances, what we do essentially is we go out and we hire a general contractor, we meaning the land bank. They bid on the work, we take lowest and best, and then we renovate the house. At that point, we're just like any other owner of real estate. We're at that point trying to sell the property to an owner-occupier. We're trying to get a maximum sales price. In many cases, we don't. Some cases we make a little bit of money, sometimes we break even, sometimes we lose money. It's one of the reasons we've only done 32 over the last 3 to 4 years, because we have to be strategic with it. It's just something that we can't scale up because the market won't allow us to, or has not allowed us to since the beginning. The third way in which we convey properties is through partnerships with the Community Development Corporation community. We've sold approximately 238 properties to CDCs over the last couple of years. In fact, 27% of that 1,000 properties that I mentioned earlier have gone to CDCs. This helps us and it helps them. The CDCs have particular neighborhood knowledge, which helps us more quickly convey these properties. As part of our agreement with the CDC is that they have to ensure that the property gets renovated to a reasonable standard and gets into the hands of an owner that will act responsibly with the property. What we also provide the CDCs as part of the transaction is that they're able to buy the property from us at cost. So again, they're able to make a little bit of money in the process, but at the same time ensure that our standards are being met. And that's a very powerful relationship that we have with the CDC community. The fourth and final way in which we convey properties is through working with nonprofit organizations. I'm going to give you a quick example of 3 of them, and then I'll conclude. First, I think as many of you may know, the council was gracious enough last year to grant the Cuyahoga Land Bank $100,000 to support home ownership for veterans. The land bank matched your $100,000 with our $100,000, and as a result, we have at least 5 to 6 veterans that are currently living in land bank homes. Some of them have lease options, some of them have actually own the home, and some of them actually rent the properties, and that program continues to grow, and we're excited about what we're able to do with for our veterans with your support. Second program, for example, you may or may not know is we work with an organization called the International Service Center. That's a nonprofit group that's been around for 100 years that helps place refugees from around the world. Many of these refugees have assisted the United States government in places like Iraq. And when they come to the United States to get resettled, they need a place to live. And we've conveyed approximately 5 properties to this nonprofit organization, and then they worked with these refugees to provide housing. A new program that is actually emerging now is called BRAIN, Bringing and Retaining Academic Investment Now, BRAIN. This is a pilot program that we're testing right now with CSU. About 30 days ago, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the college. The idea is that if you are a recent graduate from Cleveland State University, the land bank will offer you a house at a deeply incentivized price. The idea is that we want to kind of retain talent, although the reason that a person moves from Cuyahoga County may not just be a house, it may be a job, it may be other factors, but we wanted to find some way that we can contribute to the effort of keeping talent right here in Cuyahoga County. So as you can see by my comments, I mean, the land bank has a pretty significant renovation program, and we continue to do what the market allows us to do. One of the reasons we're particularly excited about the program is because much of our program is driven by private dollars. So our strategy often is how do we figure out how to incentivize the private market to get into the renovation space with us? And we believe we've been successful at doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I would like to bring up Council President, Land Bank Board President, Councilman Brancatelli, if you'd like to add any comments.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. Now I know how the other half lives. These are great digs. This is my first time here, and I see you're not putting the shot clock on, so that's a good thing. I have about an hour and a half presentation, so. I just wanted to just reiterate a couple points and emphasize a few points that were made, and just step back in time a little bit. I think as this bond was evolving, there were a number of key principles and things that we worked on before the bond came out, and it really was to focus on why do demo and why put those resources in as significant as this county chose to do. And they're around key elements around some studies that we had done. The studies really came out in strong sense that it lowers foreclosure rate by doing demolition. It adds value to the real estate market by clearing out the distress. We know how much distressed properties bring down our property values. It also helps stop the tax burden shift that has been going out to the suburbs. And we have seen in our study that the tax shift burden, because of the blight that's in our communities, keeps getting pushed out to the outer ring suburbs. And we also know that it saves houses. If you're trying to keep people from moving and leaving different communities, you better take care of the blight that's immediately around you. And the other point I wanted to make is, given those items and given the studies that we had already done, the best case scenario for when I look at how we spend this dollars is to spend it as quickly and as judiciously as we can. Spreading it out over 3, 4, 5 years is really going to only exasperate the points I made earlier. The faster we spend these resources, the faster we make a big impact in our community. And we know that we can do this strategically. When you look around as this dollars rolled out, the cities have been evolving strategies already. And the wisdom of this body to put together the application proposal that gives the cities to come in and really emphasize their demolition strategy through the typologies of the different neighborhoods, through the urgency that they have for emergencies, fires, those kinds of things that will continue to drag down the neighboring properties. being strategic around churches, civic institutions, social centers. Those kind of strategies are what many of the municipalities are looking at and how we use these resources, because it is a very precious resource. We also look at the sophisticated structure that we have already in place. So behind me, you have the County Land Bank, one of the best land banks in the United States. We have representation from CASE, NeoCanDo, the folks who have the ability, as Gus Frangos likes to talk about, putting the eye on a property, so they can look at the environmental factors around them. So we have the ability to look at data and use data as one of the drivers on how we make these decisions. We also look at a structure that we have that's very sophisticated with the CDCs and their partnerships with our local council members. In the city of Cleveland, we have some 20 very successful CDCs that have been working very strategically with our county council and with our city council members and talking about how we lay out these strategies. And we have two of the best land banks around, the County Land Bank and the City Land Bank, who work hand in hand. And I get, fortunate or unfortunately, I go to a number of national conferences, and they continue to look at our land banks as being the model land banks all around the United States. They look at what we're doing as best practices. So we already have a strategy that uses best practices that others are coming in to model on a pretty regular basis. And much to the wisdom of our president, he has been able to sell that strategy to other cities. So we look at it as a resource. And we also have a significant, as was mentioned earlier, a number of reuse strategies. And the idea is not just to knock down a house and knock down a house, but is how does that fit into a reuse strategy, whether it's just to do a side yard expansion for some of these old industrial neighborhoods that only had 25-foot lots, where they can now have a 50-foot lot and something that's more of a sane footprint that makes that house last longer, or whether it's greening and talking about urban agriculture, or whether we're talking about passive and active recreation. We have seen all these different type of strategies used, and including job creation and economic development, where we're able to assemble a number of pieces of land that then we can go out and market that piece of land for job creation and for development. And we have seen that used successfully. So we have a number of other resources that we use, which also is leveraged because we're able to do demolition, because we're able to open up markets. Now we have look at rehab, which is a significant component. And as Dennis talked about, the land bank's already done over 1,000. The city of Cleveland has done thousands of rehabs and new construction as well. And this helps set the table for the private market as well as government interventions, whether we're using housing trust fund, low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, any number of those other kind of resources that get brought to the table. Our tax credit applications are due, I think, at the end of this week. And what's very specific within those tax credits, the state says what else is going on around that neighborhood. They will no longer let you just put in a number of new houses because it able to meet the demand. It has to meet a demand within a strategy within that market. So those are very competitive dollars that have to have these kind of resources that come in to clear out the blight, set the table, and be part of a strategy that you have. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Frankos, we would now open up the discussion for questions from members of the committee. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Frangos, you said that you think there are approximately 20 communities that have agency agreements, have signed agency agreements with the land bank. Could you, for the benefit of the committee, explain what an agency agreement is, how that is part of this process?
Mr. Chairman, to Council President Brady, the law, first of all, allows us to sign agency agreements with cities to serve in their footsteps for any kind of particular purpose related to nuisance abatement, and that's just in the statutes. We put that in there from the beginning. So now how does it actually play itself out? It could be all kinds of small things. Well, in this context, in the demolition context, it's a very big context. We're going to be East Cleveland, we're going to be Garfield, we're going to be Maple Heights when we go and demolish these properties by virtue of an agency agreement. We're like their agent to step in and do the nuisance abatement. Now, we don't have police powers. They have to do all the underlying legal work to declare a nuisance, to use the police powers of their city. But then once they do that, they sign an agreement with us, an agency agreement that says, okay, we're going to abide by these rules. You're going to knock down the house forest. When it's done, it's going to be seeded and graded, and you're going to place a lien on it, and the job will get done. So we're basically their arm, because they would, normally in principle, they would declare a nuisance and they would abate it. They don't have the capacity, so the land bank serves as their agent for that purpose. I don't know if that explains it.
Just one follow-up right at this point. Through the chair to Mr. Frangos. Cheryl said that you had approximately 8 applications in. Are these 20 agency agreements? I'm assuming that means that these are communities that are teed up to have applications. Why there's a disconnect here, obviously, between 8 and 20. Are these 20 communities going to be considered having gotten in time by the end of this week, which is the 27th? Or only the 8 communities that have applications, or only communities that have applications? Can you help me out with that process there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Brady. The agency agreement is a predicate to going and filing an application telling the Department of Development that they want these houses demolished through the land bank. So the first step, doesn't have to be this way, but the first step is to sign that agency agreement. That's the more simple part. Then these municipalities, go and actually identify by address, by typology, what it is that they need to get knocked down. And so far, I think 8 have filed there, East Cleveland being the most recent. East Cleveland, for example, submitted everything, I think, Friday, and there was full $1 million. They're asking for the full amount, not surprisingly. I think, for example, like Rocky River, they're going to apply, but they had a lot of questions, and we've been working with them. I don't know that they've actually filed their application, but they're clearly going to. Did they file it? Yeah, so that's an example of somebody who we know, we have an agency agreement, we know they're going to do it, they just haven't. How many of them actually get it in by the 28th? I'm not sure, but I would venture to say that most of those will, because there's been a sense of urgency on their part to sign with us. So we're assuming that's a predicate to them filing for application. And I mean, I can say that personally, anecdotally, I've had conversations with probably almost all of them saying that they wanted to file. So if they file, they're gonna be in. If not, maybe they're anticipating the second round. But I have a feeling that most of them will apply.
Okay, I'll wait.
I mean, we'll just have to wait and see on that ultimately. But I know that Maple, I think, applied. They may have applied for the full $1 million. Is Paul here? He's not. Well, in any event, we will keep the council informed as best as we can on what we know about that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Gus, you talked about the, well, let me ask this question. The $50 million was used, well, strategy is to use this money in a surge, in a short window of time to help stabilize property values. Having started to sign agreements and looking at your own inventory, do you still see us on track for that window, and what do you see that window as being?
Well, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Jones, if I understand the question, I do believe that the process with the Department of Development has went very well, and so I think we are on track to get things moving there. I think that the idea of a surge, as Councilman Brancatelli indicated, is the best strategy, because as you delay it longer and longer and longer, more blighted properties come online, and they just sort of feed off each other. The idea is to cut it off and do that through this surge and try to get as much of it done within the 2 or 3 years that we have.
You also made the comment, well, not you, but I think it was one of the presenters, that you're doing renovation, rehab, But because of the market, you just weren't not able at this moment to scale it up. One goal, I think, is to one day build on these $50 million demolition dollars, certainly advocate for more dollars, but then to look at something comprehensive in terms of rehabbing. Any comments you can, or thoughts you can share about something that might be scaled up or something on a larger scale, knowing what experience you've already had in this area?
Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Jones, I think what Mr. Roberts was saying is our in-house, where we actually invest the dollars and fix them and sell them, that's not entirely scaled up. We have to be very cautious about that. But what is scaled up, that 1,000 properties that you heard, that is a scaled up, that's a program that's humming. It's a scaled up renovation program, because that's probably, that's a lot. No one else is doing that kind of volume, but that's in the private sector. So in other words, we're getting these properties in, we're speccing them out, we put them on our website, and the private sector is buying these properties, spending their money, putting that money back into the economy and fixing these homes, and then either they're selling them, or they're, I think probably 35% of those are actually homeowners, owner occupants. So that part of it is scaled up. The private sector is reacting, but as you might suspect, the private sector is reacting to market conditions. If there's a neighborhood where they feel they can't get their money out, or they're just not going to invest there, it's not, and we have to be mindful of that. On the other hand, though, where there is a market, the private sector is responding, at least to the extent that we have these sales going on. I mean, we have sales like every week. We have people buying these properties off of our website. Now, it doesn't speak to an overall housing strategy, which I don't think should be a function of the demolition dollars per se, but that's always a good thing. It just that's the point of a housing strategy and a housing program, to incorporate realities of the market. I mean, we had housing that was designed for 1 million people in the city, and we have maybe 375,000 in the city. So as much rehab as we may want to do, we're not going to get up to 600,000 or 700,000 or 800,000 people in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. So these realities have to be incorporated into a housing strategy that blends it all together, rather than a more like the root canal that I said. But they have to occur together, I maintain.
My last question. This $50 million is the largest amount any county has put towards demolition, but we know it's not the total amount needed. Can you just speak for a moment on what advocacy is going on and what could be done, or what other advocacy efforts from other levels might be needed to help get the dollars necessary to actually solve the problem?
I think part of what we're doing begins to, it's not a dollar for dollar problem. That is to say, if you have like $200 million of a problem and you take care of 50 million of it, all of a sudden there's not necessarily $150 million less of a problem. You've cleared out, you've set the table, as Chairman Brancatelli said, which maybe brings that down to $100 million, because you've actually set the table, you've created market, the private sector can step in. But having said that, there still is a much greater need, and we know that. And there are efforts, I'm not familiar with all of them, but there are, Thriving Communities continues to try to get federal dollars. One of those efforts that they spearheaded was trying to get the U.S. Treasury Department to allow OFA to convert some of those hardest hit funds into demolition dollars. It's just not a popular thing to go to somebody and say, hey, why don't you invest in demolition? There's no profit side to it. You have to talk in terms of this neighborhood profit over a long-term basis where you're stabilizing markets. But so having said that, I mean, I do know that there continues to be a pretty robust effort throughout the country on trying to get mortgage fraud settlements where mortgage occurred. And I don't know, I mean, if there's, Tony, you might know better than I if there's some specific initiatives to try to get that. Yeah. There is some legislative efforts that we're considering within the land bank about going back to the Ohio legislature to sort of create progressive-based TIFs, you know, to bring more dollars in for the demolition effort. That's something that I need to research more, and in effect, what that is if we bring a property in that had zero basis, it was a bad property, and we bring it in and it now has a zero taxable value. If we get it fixed, if it becomes renovated, if it goes back onto the tax rolls, you know, maybe there's Atlanta, Nebraska, 5 or 6 other states have done this. They will say, for example, that, well, to the extent that that property went through that kind of intervention and a whole lot of expense was made to do that for a 5-year period, those taxes will be split between the land bank to continue its mission and the taxing authority. So it's not like you're actually abating something that existed. You're taking a phantom receivable that was never bringing anything in and now causing it to get back onto the duplicate. So it makes it not regressive, or if regressive, less regressive in that kind of way. So, but that requires some legislation at our end, and we may go back to the legislature with something like that. Some people that have done this over a long period of time, and they can point to like hundreds over a period of time that went into the system. They actually can float a bond off of that. But it's just theoretical at this point in my mind. But I could tell you, another example, one that when I was working at the Treasury, which I observed, at that time, 2003, 4, 5, I think is when we were doing border revision tax foreclosures. It was not uncommon that if you took all of the residential border revision valuation cases, many of them had to do with people saying at that point in time, reduce my property taxes because I live next to a house that's vacant and abandoned, or I live on a street with, these condemned homes. So you got a BOR, a border revision case, seeking a valuation reduction for that reason alone. And so my to that point of it's not a dollar for dollar, problem. When those properties, if those condemned vacant and abandoned properties next to that house that was seeking a border revision reduction, if those condemned homes were down, yes, there's a vacant lot next to it, but the basis for that appeal for reduction, it no longer exists. So a lot of that, we were anecdotally, admittedly, we were seeing a lot of that. I mean, those applications, probably 30, 40% of them at one point were, I live next to a vacant and abandoned house. Well, let's take it down. Let's see, you eliminate the appeal, at least on that basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. Councilman Miller.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Frangos, first I want to commend you for the efforts on getting this program underway in an expeditious fashion, and also the extent to which we seem to be putting this in the broader context of an overall strategy, which I think is very helpful. To try to get a sense of the scope of this initial effort out of the gate, could you run down the list of the communities that so far have agency agreements?
Do we have that list here? Did we bring it today?
I didn't bring the list, but
I can rattle a bunch of them off, but I might miss a couple.
okay. Bratnall, Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, Cuyahoga Heights, Newburgh Heights, Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, Warrensville Heights, Euclid, South Euclid, University Heights, Middleburg, East Cleveland, Rocky River, Moreland, Berea.
Do we have one with Lakewood?
We have one with Lakewood, Parma Heights, and I forgot how many, what did we reach with that? Did I miss anybody, Paul?
My spreadsheet's upstairs. I apologize.
But he wouldn't have a list of our agency agreements. Paul would have what we actually filed. We can get that to the committee. I apologize for not having that list for you.
Well, you're up to 19, so you came pretty close. Okay. Second question is for those communities who don't participate in the first round, when would the next opportunity be?
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Miller, I'm not sure about that. I don't recall. I mean, is there a time fixed on that, Mr. Herdig? Or is it, I just am not sure. I apologize for that.
You want me to? Okay. Good morning, Paul Herdig, Department of Development. Gentlemen, at this point, all that's been officially decided is that round one will continue through February 27th. We have briefed the county executive and are awaiting some further direction from the county executive on exactly what the next steps will be.
Okay. The third question I have is to follow up on Councilman Jones's question, where you were saying that we invest this money, we take care of the worst $50 million worth of problems, and that this may bring down the total inventory more than mere subtraction because of the dynamic impact on the market. And my question is whether and how we're going to try to measure that. Are we going to, at some point, try to say, well, we've done such and such, where are we now? How much is left? What has been the impact? Has it changed the market? Do we have any process in place for trying to do that kind of ongoing evaluation?
We have, certainly that was done at the front end with the studies that you have, that showed tipping neighborhoods, non-tipping neighborhoods, multiplier factors related to, when you remove blight in a particular neighborhood. So sort of on an econometric level, that forecasting has occurred. At the back end, I imagine you could probably do something similar again to see the outcome. It's beyond my skill level here to really know what that might be. But one thing for certain, and it's a great question, and it's something that we should be able to supply, because what it'll do is what we intuitively know. If you live on a street, and you've got 5 vacant and abandoned homes and they get taken down, if you've done nothing else, you've made the rest of that street better, you've made the people on that street better, you've made the fire departments and the police departments happier, you've saved money and, direct intervention on all of the enforcement activities that go on with a municipality that struggles with vacant and abandoned properties. And how you actually quantify that, I'm not certain, but for many of us, including yourself, that have been in the Cleveland City Council for years, we know intuitively that there's going to be a significant benefit to doing this kind of thing. I don't know if there's some actual methodology other than going back to the people that did our studies that. Oh, that's a good point. That's right. I'm sorry. Tom Fitzpatrick, who's also on our board, he is doing just that. And I think he, at our last board meeting, they came out with an initial summary. They have a draft and actually does show the benefits, some actual objective, discernible benefit to everything that we're talking about here. I completely forgot about it because it was a draft. But the Federal Reserve will come out with something more official that addresses your question. I turned 60 years old, and so I'm forgetting.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, final question. As you know, we're in the process of doing a comprehensive housing strategy through the Planning Commission. And my question is whether you're planning to look at each of the applications we get, and for each of the applications, the communities are charged with telling us how their proposed program fits into their individual community's housing strategy. And are we going to go through the process of trying to look at all those strategies, try to figure out what the county-wide implications are, what the commonalities are, and to ask ourselves what information that we obtained from the individual community strategies that we can effectively input into developing the county-wide strategy.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Miller, I think that's probably what needs to happen as far as developing a comprehensive strategy, an overall strategy that takes into account, again, it's more of a matrix type of analysis with regard to our cities. Certain cities like Parma, Lakewood, Shaker Heights, they're going to have highly developed housing strategies that we dare not tell them what to do with theirs because they will bark back significantly. On the other hand, there are communities that either have a strategy or don't have a strategy, but don't have sufficient funds to make that analysis, and that's a place where the county can be helpful to a Maple or to a Garfield, with the point ultimately being bringing it all together to see what our collective impacts is. Genesee County, for example, that started land banking, their communities have virtually no planning. A few cities within Genesee County, where Flint, Michigan is, they have, some planning, but that county land bank by default does a little bit of planning. But we're very fortunate here in Cuyahoga County because most of our cities have either well-developed or some modicum of a housing plan or a strategy. And then, of course, we're blessed to have the planning department itself with which we work with. And so I think that it's axiomatic that any kind of going forward on a plan requires us to bring all that inventory in, digest it, put it back out, and see how we can support the good things that are happening and support the things that aren't happening that need to happen. I forgot to mention one thing. One of the people that is very significant in terms of doing analysis and property research is Mike Schramm. He is in here in two hats with Neo Candu and also with the land bank. Mike, are you here? Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't recognize him, but he's very instrumental in a lot of this land use analysis, spatial analysis, things of those sort, which would also inform an overall housing strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have any more questions from the committee? Councilman Greenspan.
Well, I'm not a member of the committee. I'll defer to a committee member. Okay, great, thank you. Just so I'm clear, the first deadline's the end of this week. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Greenspan, I believe it's the 27th or 28th, 27th, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. The $3 million a year, so in the legislation, the land bank is to be granted $3 million a year for 3 years, of which the first 3 has already been appropriated. Explain your strategy in using that $3 million.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Greenspan, to try to capsulize the strategy, there's a lot that went into it over several months to understand why that was placed in there. But the land bank currently has its pipelines, which is tax foreclosure, Fannie Mae, and HUD, and some other ones. But those 3 are the biggest ones. And in the case of Fannie Mae and HUD, that harnessing those pipelines itself was a strategy, if you know what I mean. That wasn't like, well, let's pick these houses and these houses. It was the pipeline itself because Fannie Mae and HUD were just transacting these properties. It was like trafficking in junk bonds, thinking they were doing good by shucking the properties for $500 and $1,000 in some of the worst neighborhoods, was highly destabilizing just in terms of ownership as well as destroying any kind of remainder of comparables. So getting HUD and Fannie Mae to stop that and to bring those properties into the land bank was a strategy. So we don't want that to stop, number one. We need to have that continue because they still, there's just a ton of distressed properties that they would otherwise place onto the market in a destructive way. It would be speculation, and most of those speculated properties end up back in tax foreclosure. So, so in the meantime, now the land bank is going to be doing, call it, another 1,000 or 1,500 demolitions a year, completely separate from that. And so the land bank, in order to be able, that's like a whole nother land bank, layered on top of the existing land bank. So in order to do that, we felt, and I advocated that the integrity of the land bank's current programs, its capacity, its output needs to remain held harmless. And if we were going to be essentially doing a whole nother land bank worth of output, we needed to make sure that those pipelines and our activity and our staffing and all of that remain robust and strong. And the other thing is that most of the properties that we demolish, are ones that we typically own, that we bring in. So we have, unlike some of the nuisance abatements, we have to maintain them, we have to field service them, that we have to board the windows, cut the grass, change the locks, put antifreeze in the toilets, and do everything to weatherize them. And it just all comes with a huge cost. So we can't leave, even though we don't own nuisance abated properties, the moment we touch it, we're just going to have to put a lot of that back into that system, because the public, I don't think, will appreciate the idea of the nuance that, well, you're the land bank, you don't own it, you did a nuisance abatement. They're just going to want to see, results. So hence, in my mind, as the president of the land bank, I'm sitting here watching this and saying, wait a minute, we can't do. It's like the analogy of a McDonald's. You have one grill man, the maximum capacity is 100 burgers at lunchtime. Well, hopefully you can do 500 burgers at lunchtime. It means you got more business, but that one grill man can't do it. You'll have to get a second grill man or a third grill man, and so that's
So
that's
just
my answer.
No. So the land bank gets $7 million a year from the county already for its
Yes.
operations. This $3 million, my understanding was this was, with the exception maybe 10%, set aside should a community. This is should a community contract with the land bank, but no more than 10% shall go to the land bank for administration. So are you saying that part of this $3 million a year is for administrative costs above, say, although the 10 may not be applicable to this $3 million, but are you saying that part of this $3 million is going towards administration?
The Bill, why don't you come up here, because no, I mean, the 3 million is for demolition.
Purely
but-
demo,
But
okay.
whether it's for demo, I mean, it should include administration. You just can't do 500 hamburgers and not hire another grill man.
No,
You
I
know what I'm
understand,
saying?
but and this goes to the next question. I guess I'll lead into this discussion. Right now, the 41 million that's undedicated to the land bank is dedicated for communities. They can contract with the land bank, or they can do it themselves, as I remember the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Greenspan, yes.
And if they contract with the land bank or anyone else, the cap is only 10% of the cost for administration, correct?
2%.
2%, okay, 2%.
So like if we demolish something that's $10,000, we get a whopping $200.
$200. So with the 41 million, that's how that money and the administration costs and the hard demo costs are appropriated. Are you saying that with the 3 million a year for 3 years, that 9 million has a different formula?
The $3 million will just go to the demolition, it'll go to field servicing, it'll go to all of the core programs of the land bank.
So it's
Our
different
administration,
it's different than the 41 million. So I look at this as two pots. You got 9 million to the land bank and 41 million that could go to the land bank but is open to the communities. Are we saying that the 9 million to the land bank has a different spending standard than the 41 million?
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Greenspan, no. All of that money is going to demolition. All of it goes to demolition. We just have to take our staff and everything that we spend on administration and move it to this. And so that will leave this large gap in demolition activity here. And in order to keep our staff doing what they do and to ramp up a little bit, we just needed to make sure that those core programs, Fannie Mae, HUD, in other words, if we did not get that, at some point we would have to terminate Fannie Mae and the HUD program.
But let me ask it this way. So of the three, let's just take 1 year. Of the 3 million, no more than 2%, 98% will go towards demolition, and 2% will go towards administration. Is that? I mean, it's a yes
Mr.
or no?
Chairman, Councilman Greenspan, no, out of the 9 million, none of it goes to administration.
Okay.
That makes it different than the 41 million, where if we do a demolition at a request of a municipality, they will pay us 2%.
Okay, perfect. All right, that was just, I wanted to get clarity on that. The, moving on, moving on just to one more question, and is Councilman Brancatelli here? I saw him step out. Okay, just, I have a question relating to the city of Cleveland and its relationship with the land bank, understanding that Cleveland has a very large, active, robust land bank, so does the county. Also understand that we've just appropriated 50 million. I know Cleveland is putting out to bond 100 million. How much of that 100 million is for demolition?
The $100 million is broken down to a number of categories. Demolition is not one of them. It's obviously, we can look out our window and talk about getting new street plows and equipment. We're also looking at investing in housing market, investing in business, economic development. There's a number of different categories that it's broken down into.
Councilman, we want to keep it, narrowly focused to the demo program here at the county, so I would ask that we move on to another question, please.
I was just trying to ascertain
Understood.
the collaboration between the city and the county on demo, that's all.
Yeah, we are.
If the chair doesn't want to discuss any further,
I can tell you that
Only because we would like to move on. We have, I believe, other questions that we need to get to. Thank you.
I'll leave it to the, okay, thank you.
Councilman Jones.
What's always in the back of my mind is our charter that always says we need to improve our economic competitiveness of our resident stakeholders. And one effort is always to improve economic inclusion. We talk about community benefits, whether they're agreements, policies, procedures, community benefit programs, all of those things. With $50 million, there's going to be an impact, not just in the work that's being done, but the contracting and job opportunities. As it's already been said, $9 million is going to flow through you, through your operation, but also $41 million is as an agent. A significant amount of that, you'll be an agent. So you're going to sit at the hub, at the center of whatever inclusion efforts and community benefit and movement of dollars. You're going to be a major player in this $50 million. Over your 4-year history, take a moment and just, and you don't have to go in great depth, but give me a sense of what you have done to, in terms of inclusion for minority contractors as a history over the past 4 years, and what you see happening with this $50 million. And if you would, in that context, also include any comments about the reentry population.
Mr. Chairman, to Councilman Jones, in terms of the contracting, right now we have a very large MBE, FBE participation in our programs. I'm going to focus just on the demolition a bit because that's where the biggest dollars are being spent. Right now, our minority MBE, FBE participation with contractors, the number of them, 45% of our contractors are MBE, FBE. In terms of the dollars, the actual dollars that are spent, 55% are MBE, FBE. So, I mean, it just is what it is, you know, and I think that has a lot to do with, well, it has to do with a few things. One is Ms. Stevens trains. She does it every quarter. She brings the demolition contractors in, she trains them. She spends a lot of time, you know, putting some very serious parameters on the standards that we require. And you might think that that would chase people away. It doesn't. It lets people know exactly where they need to be, and if they do it, they get paid very quickly. And I think that's the other item. You know, smaller business, if it takes 90 days to get paid, it's just really hard for a small business, whether it's minority or non-minority, to just participate in something. So I think that the training that they get, Cheryl in particular also tries to promote or cultivate lately FBEs. How many FBEs do we have, Cheryl? Three. Okay, so we have three. And it's just, it's not a set aside per se, but it's a conscious effort to try to train people that want to get into this business to come and do it and learn it. And so from past history, that is pretty much what our participation is in those dollars.
55%.
55% of the dollars spent. And then we have other, you know, programs are, I don't know, I haven't done an analysis on like field servicing. We spend $1.5 million on, you know, just the field servicing, the maintaining the properties. We have like 1,400 properties in our inventory. I would venture to say that probably 60 or 70% MBE participation. How about dollars? Well, so it would be dollars spent, yeah. So it's well over 50%, and it just is what it is. You know, we bid this stuff out. Lowest and best carry the day, and I think we create a professional environment as well as a forthcoming kind of environment where small business MBEs, FBEs find it easier to engage in. So I don't see, in terms of the future, you asked about the future, I don't see that changing. I mean, some of these, they're the best contractors, and so they will continue to participate. The community reentry is, it's like any other social program that you have to try to integrate without losing money. And so we use Court Community Service that does a lot of our lots in the summertime. Those are the formerly incarcerated or people that are doing community service in lieu of incarceration. So I think we still, I know we still do that with Court Community Service. They're not hardened felons, but they're people that have been from misdemeanors to some serious crimes, and they do a lot of our work there. We also, on a smaller scale, deal with organizations like King's Sons. Those folks are essentially all formerly incarcerated individuals or kids or people that are just in challenged households and environments. So King's Sons, their director brings these folks in, and it's far more than just learn how to chop the weeds down every summer, but they are learning to do construction. They're learning how to do drywall, and I think they've done several of our homes already. We're treating them as a legitimate regular contractor now for the land bank. What I like about them is that they're more entrepreneurial, and this is what we want to try to foster at the land bank. Their folks have gotten their asbestos survey certifications. They've got their asbestos remediation license, and they're doing some of our work and other people's work. And I really like that kind of community reentry. And we still do a little bit of the fatherhood initiative. I think we still have some of that workforce coming through the county that we do. But it's like anything else. If it requires a large investment and we're losing money, it's harder. So the ones that I've just described to you are ones that they're entrepreneurial, we make them work, and everybody's gaining an advantage.
Just for clarity, the Fatherhood Initiative, are they referring men to you? What is the relationship or partnership with Fatherhood Initiative?
Dennis, you want to, and as of this winter season, I don't know that we've done too much there, but You can talk a little bit about it.
Mr. Roberts, we'll answer the question, but we would like to, continue on the presentation. Thank you.
Sure. The way our engagement with the Fatherhood Initiative primarily has been with the organization known as Career Development Placement Strategies, run by Executive Director Maurice Stevens. And what his nonprofit would do is they take in guys who have records. They provide all the work readiness, skills, the soft skills, make sure the person is prepared and ready to change their life and get a job. What we have done in the past is we provided what we call the laboratory, i.e. our houses. Essentially, we've contracted with the nonprofit organization, understanding that that organization would then employ these men and teach them construction skills. The idea was we would get our house renovated on a timely basis and on budget, and they at the same time would learn valuable skills that they could then take into the workplace and hopefully make them more valuable. I'd like to add one of the biggest things we do relative to reentry is that we don't do anything, meaning that we don't discriminate against a person as a result, unless there's an important need or there's a relevancy. I mean, if you come forward, you can do the job. If you served your time, we're prepared to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Just a few comments. Two great questions asked, one by Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Councilman Greenspan in regards to collaboration within the city, and the conclusion from Councilman Jones. Two issues that have always been a top priority of this council, just from what I've learned from coming to the council. We talk about inclusion, talk about collaboration amongst others around the county. So thanks again for those questions. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask Mr. Frangos a question, and then I'd like to have, finally, I'd like to hear a little more from Councilman Bracatelli, because he's been involved in this issue so intensely for such a long time. Mr. Frangos, as you will recall, and as members of the council certainly will recall, after the former county executive made the proposal, it was a long process of legislation coming over to the council, of trying to define what that legislation was, which turned out to be a lot more difficult than just sending the legislation over. We dealt with so many people across this very large community, and so many, well-intentioned, really good people who had a lot of ideas. And, we had a lot of cooks in the kitchen, or a lot of cooks trying to get in the kitchen. And it was difficult to put together a proposal, a project that tried to encompass the best ideas, but also tried to respect the experience that we have in this community through people that have been involved in this, like yourself and Mr. Bracatelli and the Land Bank over the last several years. And but there are still good people in the community who are still interested in floating ideas about what this project could be. And I'm concerned about that, because I'm concerned it may slow down this process if this process is reanalyzed and we try to take it apart and look at it over and over and over again in order to try to make it better. I think that what happens is that it's the old cliche about the perfect being the enemy of the good, and I'm concerned about that going forward. One of the proposals that keeps floating around, which is on its face, of course, something we would all be for, but I'd like to ask Mr. Frangos first. One of the ideas that's being floated around is the idea of a workforce development, that this be some workforce development program be incorporated into this. And I wanted to see how you felt about the possibility of something like that being incorporated into the project.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Brady, I mean, as far as like the history and how we got here, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, we all of the ideas about workforce, about a housing strategy, about rehab, about when, where, the level of what is a target area. All of these things happened over a period of 8 months. and indeed some of the best minds in our community, whether it's Darrell Rush, Councilman Brancatelli, all of the CDCs. There was a huge amount of input into that process, and notwithstanding the knowledge of what needs to be done over a 20-year period in terms of a housing project, I think everybody ultimately defaulted to this one thing we need to do. We need to get a demolition program and do this because it's a cancer on our communities, and that's why you don't see the inner ring suburbs or even the outer ring suburbs complaining or creating contention or arguing. This is probably, it's the unspoken story, this is probably the most amicable and cooperative situation we have over this pot of money. You know, it's apparent, you know, you talk to folks, if people were really, really upset, it would get out. On the contrary, you know, I think, like Ed, you were at that meeting. I mean, these folks, sure, they'd like to have a lot of money to do all kinds of things, but this is one thing that needs to happen. To answer your question directly about workforce development, I would say that if there is a workforce development component, whether it comes out of these funds or elsewhere, I would limit it to, and I think we've had these discussions early on, I would limit it to 2 areas and 2 areas only, and that is in the area of field asbestos surveys. People can go to school for 2, 3, 4 days and get their asbestos survey license. They can go another week or whatever it is, a week or so, to get their asbestos remediation licenses. And we're not talking about to remediate huge, you know, buildings, but just residential remediation, taking asbestos off the pipe, you know, things of those sorts. The reason why I'm pointing to those is because those things are we have to do those things. We have to do them, and if we can do them for an inexpensive price, that's good. And at the same time, it doesn't put those these new people in inherently hazardous kind of, you know, environment. Like I would strenuously resist the idea that you can put new people and put a belt on them and put them in a demolition site real time and say, let's do workforce development. I mean, if we're commanded to do that, you know, then so be it. Well, but I would resist that because it's impractical, it's dangerous. To learn that kind of thing, you have to start, for example, with the asbestos and the remediation and going on a practice site, you know, just being the hoser for hosing the stuff down, and gradually you get to sitting on a machine. You can't, plus it would slow down the program so profoundly that we just wouldn't get the job done. So to get the job done, to do workforce development in a progressive way, not a regressive way, those are the 2 areas that I would think that come to my mind. Of course, field servicing is always, you know, a possibility. So I don't know. Any comments about that?
Mr. Chairman, no, I appreciate your response. I wanted to ask Mr. Brancatelli briefly, because I know we don't only have so much time this morning, and I know that you've spent so many years now of your life involved in this in a very big way. And you've, you know, I'd like you to share, because I know you could actually, you were joking about an hour-and-a-half presentation, but I know you very easily could do that. So that's not what I'm asking for. Okay. I think everybody knows that the ward that you represent, or part of the ward that you represent, these wards are getting pretty big in Cleveland. But basically the Slavic Village neighborhood, which a lot of us are very familiar with, and for many, many years. And I know that you were head of the CDC at one point in Slavic Village, and obviously now as a member of the council, and I believe the chairman of the Community Development Committee of the City of Cleveland, and the chairman of the Land Bank. You do a lot of frequent traveling to DC and other places to work on these issues. And Slavic Village became the sort of ground zero of the foreclosure crisis, at least in this area. And in a lot of ways, it got a lot of national attention as well. Not always the kind of attention you want, but sometimes that attention is also helpful if you're trying to solve a problem. And I was wondering if you could just briefly walk us through the last few years, or whatever you think is appropriate, to explain what's happened in Slavic Village, because a lot of people are looking at Slavic Village and they're very fascinated with what's happened, but I want to make sure that we understand what did happen and how long it took that to happen and what the steps were.
Well, just as a short reference of time, I think in the 90s, when the housing market was robust, that's when I was there as a CDC director. We had rehabbed over 1,000 houses and had built new over 500 houses, and the market was very strong. And I think when you talk about workforce development, at that time when the market was strong is when we had a lot of people working. That's when our economy was at its best. And I think getting back to that stage again is really what we're looking at today, is how do you get that market strong again so you can put people back to work, you can get them back into whether it's construction jobs, rehab jobs, or any of the other ancillary things that happen from that. And then, of course, the market crash. And we had Slavic Village being ground zero was also ground zero for mortgage fraud, where through our county intervention, through the mortgage task force, all the way to the point of having somebody like Blaine Murphy, who was convicted of mortgage fraud, being sentenced to live in the community. And you fast forward and look at a neighborhood that was averaging 2 foreclosures a day, which was just something that was very difficult to manage. No community was set to do that. And then, so here we are today with thousands of vacant and abandoned properties and trying to stem the tide from thousands more to go back into the market. And we come up with innovative programs like Slavic Village Recovery. Slavic Village Recovery is a partnership with the private market, Forest City Enterprises, Safeguard Properties, or RIK rather, with the local nonprofit and with our partners all around the city, such as Cleveland Neighborhood Partnerships, formerly NPI, the County Land Bank, and others who have used their data-driven concepts to look at how do we recover a neighborhood that was hit so hard through foreclosures. So it's that private intervention that has made a big step. And it took a couple of years. It was the elephant gestation period of 2 years to get to being able to wrap our arms around what that program could be. But it also was years of intervention. The city of Cleveland has already spent over $50 million in demolition. We have already gone in. If we had not been in front of that problem, we wouldn't be able to have Slavic Village Recovery today. Slavic Village Recovery is really dependent on ongoing interventions like this demo bond money, which will help the private market look at abandoned properties. And I think as to Councilman Miller's point around how do you see that leverage changing, the future dollars needed, Slavic Village Recovery already is showing that. We're showing that probably somewhere around 25% of the houses that we thought would need to be demolished, we're now being able to recirculate back into the market, because as we demolish the worst ones, the ones that were next to it that no one would want to invest in, we're now seeing people wanting to invest in it. So it's starting to show and pay off early dividends where we can see a recovery market that is holistic. The city is stepping up, doing things like road improvements, dealing with tree trimming, public service, all those kind of things. And then the private market is, without city subsidy, rehabbing some of these houses. And it's a program that can be duplicated and should be duplicated in other neighborhoods. But you need to be able to clear out a lot of the worst blight first before you can go in and strategically look at, okay, now how do I bring in private market? And I think Gus and others that spoke about it, the private market will trail as we clear out the worst properties, and you're gonna continue to see that in other areas.
Yes, thank you. And one of the things I'm taking away from what you're saying is that there was a tremendous amount of effort by the city and in demo that laid the groundwork for this private investment.
Absolutely.
So I would just thank you for coming today, and also say that I know I and I hope that, the council will look to you and the land bank for advice because you're the experts. We have some resources. We're trying to do what we can, but we want to make sure that we rely on people who know what this is all about, what they're doing, and because there's an awful lot of really great folks that just don't have the kind of experience that you do, and they've got a lot of good ideas, but doesn't everybody?
Yeah. Well, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chairman, and also the council president. I had to get dispensation from my council president. We're in budget hearings right now, so I asked for a free pass this morning.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, one point to that, Councilman Brancatelli is being quite modest and I'm not saying this just because he's my chairman. It's for real. You know, Mr. Chairman, yourself, having been down there. Those kinds of target areas don't happen by just drawing a boundary around a geography and saying, we have a target area, let's do something. You can't enlist private dollars unless, you know, the table is set. And Slavic Village has one of the best CDCs in the city. You have the leadership of a councilman that's engaged in that on a real serious level, on a very granular level, and as well as a strategic level. You just don't have that all over the city. Some places you do, some you don't, but it's a very complex thing to do Slavic Village recovery. If you want to just click your heels and try to make that happen, it just doesn't.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I just have the final comment. First of all, thank you for, I want to thank the chairman for having this meeting this morning. This is a new committee we've been talking about putting together for a long time, for the last almost a year. And Mr. Harrison has stepped up to chair that committee. And so we're looking forward to taking a different look at some of the things that the county can be involved in than maybe we have in the past. And it's based on the experience we've had in the last 4 years, and a lot of it based on the experience of discussing with so many different people this particular issue, because of a lot of ideas, but a lot more ideas than there are resources. So I finally just want to thank the members because I want to go back for a second and remember that and remind everybody that, you know, we went through this process almost the entire year last year. And Mr. Fitzgerald's announcement of the project, or his support for the project, was not the beginning. There were people lobbying for a project like this well in advance of that. And so we thank him for doing that, but I also want people to know that there were a lot of people who were working on this and lobbying for some project like this, or some help for this kind of program well in advance of that. So this has been a long process, and it finally, came to another important point in the road near the end of last year, when this council unanimously, bipartisan, unanimously, from all parts of the county, voted to set aside the resources to move this project forward. And it's, as we all know, it's not something that's commonly done. So we're proud of it, and we're also protective of it. We feel that we have ownership in this project because it was the 11 people in this council who launched this project, who had to vote on it, who set aside the resources to do it. So we feel like we have ownership of this project, and we are not very likely to give up that sense of ownership. And so I want to thank the chairman again for taking the time to have this discussion today, and I look forward. I hope that these communities that are not in will be encouraged to get in, that the communities that are halfway in will be encouraged to get in quickly, because that was part of the rationale of the money, was that we should get it and spend it to do what we could to alleviate as much of the problem as we could, as quickly as we could, to set the table for the future. And I would be very much concerned about anything that slowed down this process, even if it was an attempt to make the program better. I would be very concerned about it. And so I hope that communities will be encouraged to get their applications in, and certainly not discouraged. And in fact, if you don't encourage communities to get their applications in, you are actually discouraging them, because you're not helping them work their way through this. Some communities are better prepared than others are, and we have to make sure that we reach out to the county as much as we possibly can, and keep this project moving forward as quickly as possible. So thank you again.
Thank you, President Brady. Just echo some of the comments from President Brady. To try and alter this process, even at the very least, I think will have more harm than help to us as we move along. And I'm very supportive of this land bank, Department of Development, the committee members, and the entire council who voted for this 11-0. To see that this happened. I just want to say thank you to the committee for bearing through this with me as my first chairmanship of this committee. It was a little rocky getting started, but we made it through. Thank you to the land bank and staff for coming out to present to us and really paint that picture of how far along we are in this process. And to see that it is going smoothly is very, very refreshing. And to hear about the partnerships with Cleveland State, and those are things. Those are the type of things you're doing there are the reason that this land bank is looked to across the world as a model on how in which they should do things. So again, thank you to you all, and thank you to our staff for putting together the agenda and other things needed to for this committee to move smoothly. So thank you everyone so much for coming today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. All of you, we just don't become what we are and do all the good things that we do in a vacuum. We do it because of the support that you have provided for us. You've made it possible for us to be creative and to do things. The Development Department has made it possible for us to move forward by working with us, and it's just been very collaborative. Collaborative. I'm happy to report.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Without further ado, Madam Clerk, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Any miscellaneous business?
No, not that I know of.
Any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Well, this concludes our first Community Development Committee meeting of 2015. Meeting adjourned.